Some nights feel like they were designed to lull you into forgetting that your life can change in a single breath. That Tuesday was one of those nights. Late October, Columbus, Ohio. The kind of cold that hasn't committed yet, just enough chill in the garage to make the fluorescent light overhead feel warmer than it actually is. I had the carburetor from my '68 Chevelle stripped down on the workbench, cleaner and rags within reach, a half-drunk bottle of Bud sweating beside the vise. No TV, no music, just the hum of the light and the honest simplicity of a machine that needed fixing. That was my world, my real world. Not the dinner parties, not the quarterly reports she left open on the kitchen table, not the corporate ladder she'd been climbing since the day I met her. My world was in here in the smell of engine grease and the satisfying logic of things that either worked or didn't. Let me tell you about Jessica, not the version I told myself for 14 years. The real version, the one you only see clearly once the smoke clears. She was electric. I mean that the way people mean it when they can't find a better word, because the truth is they were just blinded. She walked into a room and rearranged it. Smart, driven, the kind of woman who had a 5-year plan at 24. I was a mechanical engineer who liked quiet weekends, honest work, and a cold beer after both. We were not the obvious combination. But I loved her completely, the way uncomplicated men love complicated women, without reservation, and as it turned out, at profound expense to myself. 14 years, no kids, that was her choice, and I told myself I'd made peace with it. What's compromise at 27 and in love? You absorb someone else's priorities and call it partnership. You tell yourself you didn't want them anyway, you believe it just enough to keep moving. She traveled 3 weeks out of every month, closing deals, climbing ranks, charming boardrooms. The house in Columbus was mostly mine in practice. Mine to rattle around in, mine to maintain, mine to fill with the particular silence of a man who has learned not to expect company. The phone rang at 11:42 p.m. Chicago area code. I picked up without thinking. Her voice was different immediately, not slurred exactly, but loose. Unlocked. The kind of drunk that strips away the social performance you didn't even realize was always running. She didn't ease into it. That's the part I still come back to. She didn't hesitate or circle around it. She told me she was at a conference dinner. She told me the promotion she'd been chasing for 3 years was finally within reach. She told me Richard Brennan, her VP of sales, was the key to it. And then she said it. "I need a hall pass, David. One night, just Richard. Just this once," she said, her voice carrying a boldness that the alcohol had unlocked. "I want you to understand what that silence felt like. Not shock. Shock is too warm, too human. This was colder. This was the feeling of a floor you trusted turning to ice beneath your feet." I asked her to repeat it. She did with less patience the second time, like I was the problem for not following. She told me she had sacrificed everything for her career. That one night wouldn't change anything between us. That she deserved this. That word, deserved. I felt my jaw tighten around it like a wrench finding a stripped bolt. My response was quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I have never been a man who raises his voice, not because I lack the heat, but because I've always understood that heat is wasteful. "If you do this," I said low and steady, "don't come home." She laughed, not nervously, not apologetically, bitterly, the way someone laughs when they've decided you're naive. Then the line went dead. I sat on that garage stool for a long time afterward. The fluorescent light hummed. The carburetor waited. And I sat there in the particular stillness of a man who has just understood something he cannot ununderstand, that the marriage I thought I was in had never quite existed. I went to work, I ate dinner, I slept in the bed, the whole bed, for the first time in years because she wasn't in it. I watched the news. I fed the neighbor's cat when it wandered onto the porch. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I was calibrating. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for everything that comes after. I am not a man who acts from emotion. I am a man who troubleshoots. And what I was troubleshooting in those 4 cold days of silence was a single question. Had my wife of 14 years asked me for permission to sleep with her boss, or had she already? Jessica came home on a Saturday evening, 4 days after that Tuesday night call, flying back from Chicago. Rolling carry-on, blazer still fresh from the flight. The practiced ease of a woman who has learned to transition between worlds without leaving footprints. She brought me airport chocolate from O'Hare. The good kind, the Swiss stuff from the terminal shop. I noted the detail. It was the kind of gesture a guilty person makes without realizing they're making it. She kissed me on the cheek. I let her. That night I waited until she was relaxed, glass of wine down, shoulders dropped, the performance of a normal evening fully underway. Then I raised it. No accusation in my voice, no edge, just the question. "Are we going to talk about the call?" I asked quietly. What followed is the most instructive thing I have ever watched another human being do. She didn't get defensive immediately. She laughed first. Easy, dismissive, the laugh of someone who has rehearsed the response and is presenting it with confidence. "What call?" she replied, feigning confusion for just a beat. Then she shook her head with a smile. "Oh, David, that was a prank. The girls dared me. We were drinking at the conference dinner. Someone said call your husband and ask for a hall pass, and I did it for the laugh." She touched my arm while she said it. She made eye contact, slightly too steadily, I noted. "I can't believe you actually took it seriously." Then, before I could ask a follow-up question, she pivoted. "How was your week?" she asked lightly. "Did you finish the carburetor?" I have spent 20 years working with machines. I know the difference between a component that's misfiring and an engine that's blown. The misfire still has potential. The blown engine is a paperweight dressed up as a car. I know what each one sounds like. This was a blown engine. I said nothing more about it that night. I nodded. I said okay. I went to bed. But something had shifted, quietly, permanently, like a bolt that threads wrong on the first turn and will never seat correctly again. I lay in the dark and I began to think, not about what she'd done, but about what I was going to do about it. Not in anger. In the same methodical, step-by-step way I approach any engineering problem. Define the fault, identify the variables, build a process, execute without emotion clouding the measurement. I was not going to blow up in the kitchen. I was not going to beg for the truth she'd already decided to withhold. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of watching me spiral. I was going to build a case. She thought I believed her that night. She came to bed, fell asleep in 10 minutes, and I lay there in the dark watching the ceiling and thinking with absolute clarity. That was her first mistake, believing I swallowed it. Her second mistake was coming home at all. I want to be upfront with you about this chapter. I'm not going to walk you through every technical detail of how I gathered what I gathered. Partly for reasons my attorney would appreciate. Partly because the method isn't the story, the discipline is. The story is what it costs a man, emotionally, to become a ghost in his own marriage while building a case against it from the inside. Here's the broad shape of the next 3 weeks. I started with the phone records. We were on a family plan, one account, my login, full call history accessible from any browser. I pulled 6 months of Jessica's records and cross-referenced them against her travel calendar. The calls to Richard Brennan's cell, his personal cell, not his work line, appeared after hours on weekends, on Tuesday evenings when she was in the bedroom on what she called a work call, and I was in the kitchen doing dishes. I printed the records. I put them in a manila folder. I labeled it project and locked it in my shop cabinet. I consulted an attorney that same week, not to file, but to understand the landscape. She was thorough and unhurried, the kind of attorney who has run this exact play 30 times and feels no need to perform outrage on my behalf. I appreciated that deeply. She told me Ohio operates on equitable distribution. She told me documented marital misconduct doesn't guarantee a particular outcome, but shapes the narrative in asset proceedings in ways that matter. She told me what I could do and what I absolutely could not do. I filed every word of that conversation the way I filed torque specifications, precisely and without sentiment. What followed were the most emotionally demanding 3 weeks of my adult life, not because of what I was discovering, but because of what I had to perform while discovering it. I cooked dinner. I asked about her day. I watched her text at the kitchen table and wondered, with a calm that surprised even me, whether she was texting him while I dried dishes 10 feet away. I watched her sleep and understood that the face I'd loved for 14 years was, in some way I couldn't fully articulate, no longer the face I thought I knew. I reached out to a private investigator through a colleague, a former insurance fraud investigator named Glenn, compact and unremarkable in the way that good investigators tend to be. I was specific with Glenn. I wasn't interested in explicit photograph. As if they could be avoided. I needed time-stamped, location-corroborated documentation. He delivered within 2 weeks. A Cincinnati trip Jessica had described to me as a solo client visit, hotel check-in records under Brennan's corporate card, a lobby photo showing them arriving together at 6:14 p.m. on a Wednesday. She'd told me she'd be working late with the regional team. I filed it in the folder behind the phone records. Quietly and with my attorney's careful guidance, I also moved to separate a personal investment account, premarital, solely in my name, from our shared financial infrastructure. Every step documented. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal. I was building walls, not planting bombs. The detail that cost me the most was one I found myself, not through Glenn. We had a shared cloud backup, set up years ago for vacation photos, the kind of digital housekeeping you do when you're optimistic about the future. I found it on a weeknight during week 2, while she was away on another Chicago trip. In a subfolder she had clearly never imagined I would find, buried under a mislabeled album name, were photographs taken in a hotel room. Not sent to anyone. Not meant for anyone but herself and whoever she'd shared that room with. The kind of photographs that don't require a caption. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a moment, just a moment. Then I went to bed because I had work at 6 a.m. and the evidence wasn't going anywhere. By the end of week 3, I knew everything. Every trip, every call, every lie she'd told me over the course of what I now understood to be at least 8 months of this. And she had no idea I knew a single thing. That asymmetry, that quiet, invisible advantage, was the only thing I needed. Then, on a Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. 7 words. Riverside Bistro, 7 p.m., you deserve the truth. I almost ignored it. I sat with it for an hour, turning it over like a foreign part I couldn't place. Then I grabbed my keys. I arrived at Riverside Bistro at 6:55. Corner booth, back to the wall, old habit. I ordered coffee and watched the door. At 7:02, a woman came in. Composed, well-dressed, moving through the restaurant with the specific controlled stillness of someone who has been preparing for a conversation for a long time and has decided, finally, to have it. She found me without asking. She sat down across from me and placed her hands flat on the table. Claire Brennan, she said, her voice measured and deliberate. Richard's wife, 19 years, 2 teenagers. I looked at her for a moment, really looked. She was sitting across from me doing the exact same math I'd been doing for 3 weeks, calculating whether to trust a stranger with the worst thing that had ever happened to her. I recognized the calculus because I'd been running it myself. We decided in roughly 4 minutes of conversation that we could trust each other. You just know. Grief has a particular grammar and we were both fluent. She opened the manila folder she'd brought and slid it toward me. I looked at everything in it, carefully, the way I look at everything. Hotel invoices, keycard entry logs with timestamps, a photograph, clear, unambiguous, taken through a partially open doorway that removed any last fragment of interpretive doubt. I noted the dates. 2 of them aligned precisely with the Chicago conference. The night of the call, one overlapped with the Cincinnati trip Glenn had already documented. The folder didn't just confirm what I already knew. It gave me something Glenn's evidence alone couldn't provide. A second independent source, corroborating testimony from a separate, unconnected party. My attorney would later use exactly that phrase. In that moment, sitting in a restaurant booth with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, it meant something simpler. The sliver of me that had still been willing to entertain the prank explanation, the last thread of charitable doubt, went completely and permanently quiet. Claire and I talked for 2 hours. I won't share everything from that Thursday night conversation. Some of it belongs only to the 2 of us, 2 people who found themselves in that restaurant through no choice of their own. But I'll tell you the practical outcome because it matters. We agreed to coordinate our filings. Her attorney, my attorney, separate representation, synchronized timing. We wanted the papers served on the same weekend, ideally the same morning. We wanted Richard and Jessica to find out within hours of each other, close enough together that neither could warn the other or begin constructing a narrative before the walls were already up. It was, I thought, driving home that night, the most efficient thing either of us had done in years. My attorney confirmed the plan was executable within the week. She walked me through the asset division picture again, the documentation I'd gathered, the legal separation. Of my premarital account, the bank records clearly showing that Jessica's income over the final 5 years had flowed almost entirely into her personal investment accounts, while mine had serviced the mortgage, the utilities, the household. The picture it painted was not flattering to her. The picture was accurate, and accuracy is all I'd ever asked of anything. Over the following week, I moved through my marriage like a man walking a familiar building knowing it's scheduled for demolition. I was present. I was functional. Jessica and I went to a dinner party at our neighbor's house that Friday evening. I watched her work the room, charming, confident, the electric version of herself she had always performed for the world, and I thought, she has no idea this is the last weekend of the life she built, not with hatred. With the specific, quiet clarity of a man who has already finished grieving and is just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The Saturday arrived the way important days always do, looking exactly like any other morning. I made coffee. Jessica was on the couch in her robe, legs tucked beneath her, watching a home renovation show with the loose contentment of someone completely at ease. She was scrolling her phone. She looked relaxed. She looked from the doorway like a woman who had no reason to expect anything other than a quiet Saturday morning. The process server arrived at 9:22 a.m. I had coordinated this personally, the address, the time window, the confirmation signature. I opened the front door, signed the receipt, and carried the envelope to the living room myself. I set it on the coffee table in front of her. She looked at the envelope, then at me, then back at the envelope. "What is that?" she asked slowly, her voice dropping. "Divorce papers," I answered. "You've been served." What followed, I will give you without embellishment. She erupted in stages, the way a pressure system collapses when it has nowhere left to go. First came the disbelief. "Is this a joke?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "David, what is this?" When I said nothing, she reached back for the prank explanation, the same one she'd used 5 weeks ago and apparently still believed might hold. "You're doing this over a drunk phone call," she shot back, her tone hardening. Then, when she finally registered that I was not moving, not reacting, not giving her any purchase, the panic set in, genuine and uncontrolled. She told me I was overreacting. She told me we had 14 years. She told me she deserved more than this. I let her run through it all. Then, when she stopped to breathe, I said it. "I know about Chicago," I said quietly. "I know about Cincinnati. Claire Brennan says hello." The silence after that sentence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. She tried several more angles. She blamed me, said I had never been emotionally present, that she had felt unseen for years, that the affair was a symptom of my failures, not her choices. "You were never really here, David," she said, her voice breaking between the anger. "You made me feel invisible for years. This didn't happen in a vacuum." I listened to every word without expression. I had written that script myself, in the 3 weeks I'd spent trying to construct a version of reality in which she was salvageable. I had lived inside that argument and dismantled it myself, piece by piece, in the dark. She was not offering me anything new. Her belongings were packed. I had done it during the week, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. Her sister was called. By noon, Jessica had left the house in Columbus for the last time. I sat in the empty living room and finished my coffee. The grinding noise had stopped. The machine had finally gone quiet. The aftermath of a marriage is its own kind of engineering problem. What remains? What needs to be assessed? What can be rebuilt and what gets scrapped entirely? I approached it the same way I'd approached everything else. Methodically, without sentiment clouding the evaluation. The divorce finalized in just under 6 months. Ohio's equitable distribution process, aided by the documentation I'd prepared and the clear financial record of the marriage's final years, produced a settlement that was neither vindictive nor lenient. It was simply accurate. I kept the house. The joint savings were divided. The mortgage was refinanced in my name. Her personal investment accounts, which she had carefully maintained as separate assets throughout the marriage, remained hers. But she lost access to the financial infrastructure she had quietly relied on me to maintain. The security, the stability, the unglamorous, foundational architecture of a shared life that she had taken entirely for granted. She found out, I suspect, in those first months, what it costs to build something from scratch in your mid-40s without the foundation you'd been standing on. Richard Brennan did not fare better. Claire's filing coordinate. Ed airtight and executed with the precision of a woman who had been quietly gathering information far longer than I had surfaced something neither Richard nor Jessica had anticipated. The use of a corporate card for personal travel, hotel stays, dinner charges, flights booked under a business account for trips that had nothing to do with business. That information found its way, as these things tend to do when a thorough attorney is involved, to Brennan's employer's compliance department. He was placed on administrative leave within the month. The investigation that followed was not kind to him. Richard and Jessica, stripped of the professional power dynamic that had apparently been the engine of their arrangement, did not stay together. I mention this not with satisfaction, but as a factual data point. Without the architecture of secrecy and status that had defined it, whatever they had dissolved on its own. The promotion she had risked everything for never materialized, a casualty, presumably, of the reorganization that followed Brennan's departure. I note this once, I don't linger on it. Our social circle fractured along lines that surprised me at first, and then didn't. Several mutual couples removed themselves from the situation, not taking sides so much as simply disappearing, which told me everything I needed to know about whether they had been friends or social furniture. I lost two couples I had genuinely considered friends and discovered they had been, in practice, her social acquisitions all along. What I gained surprised me more than what I lost. The men in my life, my brother, two friends from my engineering program, a neighbor I'd exchanged perhaps 40 words within 6 years, showed up in the way that men sometimes show support when they don't know what to say. A six-pack on the porch, a fishing invitation, a hand on the shoulder that didn't require any elaboration. No performance, no processing, just presence. I had underestimated that. I did not start dating. I was not remotely interested in that. I converted Jessica's home office into a workshop extension, new shelving, better lighting, a second workbench I'd been wanting for a decade. I put the tools where I wanted them. I left the house the way I wanted to leave it. I am not glad she is struggling. I want to be careful to say this clearly because I know how these stories are supposed to feel, the cheering audience, the satisfying slow-motion downfall. That is not what this is. I don't need her to suffer. I simply needed to stop being inside the blast radius. That feels entirely different from glad. What? I'm back in the garage, same fluorescent light, same stool, different carburetor, this one from a '71 Mustang a friend brought over last month. The bench is where I left it. The tools are where I put them. I don't have a lesson for you. I want to be honest about that because I've watched enough of these stories to know what they're supposed to deliver. The wisdom, the growth, the redemptive turn where the man says what he learned and you leave feeling like something was resolved. I'm not sure anything was resolved. I'm not sure that's how it works. What I have is a clear accounting. 14 years, a house, a workshop, a job I'm good at. The hard, irreversible, clarifying knowledge that I can sit in the worst silence I have ever known and not become someone I don't recognize. That's what I walked out of this with. That's what she couldn't take because it was never hers to take. When the house is quiet now, I don't think about Jessica. I don't think about Richard Brennan or the hotel photographs or the moment I said Claire Brennan says hello and watched 14 years drain out of my wife's face. I think about the garage on that Tuesday in October, the carburetor on the bench, the phone ringing, the last second before I answered, the last second in which the world still made the kind of sense I'd always assumed it made. I don't wish I'd let it go to voicemail. A man needs to know what he's actually dealing with. There are no children caught in this. There is no custody arrangement, no 9-year-old asking why mom isn't here anymore. The compromise I made at 27, the one I called partnership and she called a convenience, turned out to be the one mercy the marriage offered me. I didn't understand that until the marriage was over. Now I do. I finish the carburetor, I install it, I turn the key. The engine starts clean. She took 14 years. She didn't take what I'm made of. That part was always mine.